At least my kids will have connections, my brother said, swirling the wine in his glass. He didn't look at me, but the words were aimed like darts across the Thanksgiving table, right over the perfectly browned turkey and my mother's prized cranberry sauce. This public school thing you're doing with Leo, it's a little embarrassing. Forks froze midair. The room went dead silent, except for the faint sound of a football game murmuring from the television in the den. 20 people, aunts, uncles, cousins, my own parents, just sat there, their expressions ranging from pity to mild amusement. My son Leo, who was 10 years old and sitting right next to me, looked down at his plate, his small shoulders slumping. He had been so proud to tell his Uncle Garrett about making the school robotics team. My mother let out a small, tinkling laugh, the sound she always made to shatter tension she herself had helped create. "Oh, Garrett," she chided gently, but her eyes were dancing. "Don't tease your sister. Nancy does her best." Her best. As if I were a struggling charity case. My name is Nancy Marshall, and for 34 years, I have been the invisible daughter, the quiet fixer, the family's emotional and, more often than not, financial shock absorber. I am the one who balances the books they can't, who soothes the egos they won't, and who swallows the insults they serve up like appetizers. To them, I was just a mid-level supply chain analyst, a single mother living a modest, embarrassing life. They didn't know that 3 months before she passed, my grandma Edith, the formidable founder of Marshall Hardware, had sat me down in her quiet, sunlit study. She had handed me a single, heavy document, her hand trembling slightly with age, but not with doubt. It was the voting proxy for her 51% controlling interest in the company. "Your brother has your father's charm and your mother's backbone," she'd said, her voice like dry leaves rustling, which is to say, none. "This business needs a spine. You are its spine, Nancy, even if you have to be it from the shadows." They didn't know I held the key to the entire kingdom Garrett so proudly lorded over. They didn't know that with that one casual, cruel sentence aimed at my son, he had just handed me the reason to finally turn it. They thought I would take it, that I would swallow this humiliation like all the others. They were wrong. If you've ever been treated like the black sheep simply for not being the chosen one, you know what that silence feels like. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace for your family and protecting your own sanity, or the heart of your child, you understand the precipice I was standing on. They had forgotten that a quiet person is not a weak person. They had forgotten that the one who fixes everything also knows exactly where all the cracks are. The story of my family is a story of 2 children, raised under the same roof but in 2 different worlds. Garrett was the golden boy, the heir apparent from the moment he was born. 5 years after me, I was the responsible one, the practice run. While I was learning to be self-sufficient, he was learning to be catered to. Every milestone of his was a parade. Every achievement of mine was a quiet footnote. His acceptance into our father's alma mater, a prestigious university he only got into through a hefty donation and a legacy preference, was marked by a lavish party at the local country club. My full academic scholarship to a state university, a better school by national ranking, was acknowledged with a pat on the back and a, "Well, that's practical, dear." The subtext was always there, thick and suffocating. Garrett was the investment, I was the utility. This dynamic crystallized when our father retired and handed the reins of Marshall Hardware to Garrett. At 26, with a freshly printed MBA that taught him corporate buzzwords but not an ounce of fiscal responsibility, Garrett became CEO. I, with a decade of real-world experience in logistics and supply chain management, skills directly applicable to a hardware distribution company, wasn't even considered. I was a woman, I was quiet, and I had chosen a path outside the family bubble. I wasn't worthy. I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I told myself it was their business, their choice. But I watched from the sidelines as Garrett began to run it into the ground. My father, the silent enabler, would sit at family dinners and listen to Garrett's grandiose plans, nodding along with a placid smile, never questioning, never intervening. My mother, the giggling enforcer, would beam and tell everyone how her son was a natural leader, a visionary. The first major sign of trouble was the Digital Modernization Initiative. It was Garrett's flagship project. He hired a flashy consulting firm run by one of his college friends for an obscene fee of $250,000. They produced a 100-page report filled with charts and jargon that recommended scrapping our entire functional inventory system for a proprietary software that was buggy and ill-suited for our needs. I read the proposal he so proudly emailed to the family, all of whom ignored it except me, and immediately saw the flaws. The new system didn't integrate with our top 3 commercial clients' procurement platforms. I tried to warn him. I called him, not to criticize, but to offer a solution. "Garrett," I said calmly, "I think this is a bold move, but we need to run a parallel test before cutting over. The system specs here won't talk to the API from Builders Inc. We could lose them." He laughed. It was a dismissive, patronizing sound. "Nance, leave the big picture stuff to me, okay? You're stuck in the weeds. This is about synergy, disruption. We have to break things to move forward." He broke things all right. Within 3 months of the new system's disastrous launch, we lost all 3 of those commercial accounts. The combined loss in annual revenue was over $700,000. When the quarterly report came out, my father simply sighed and said, "There are always growing pains." My mother blamed the clients, saying they were resistant to progress. Garrett framed it as a necessary pruning of legacy clients who weren't aligned with his new vision. No one was ever held accountable. Every time he failed, the family narrative twisted to absolve him. Every time I offered a solution, I was told I was being negative. Then came the vanity projects. He spent $80,000 on a local marketing campaign that consisted almost entirely of billboards featuring his own smiling face, holding a power drill. Garrett Marshall. "Building the future of hardware," the tagline read. It was absurd. Our customers weren't highway drivers. They were contractors and tradespeople who cared about stock levels and competitive pricing, not my brother's new headshots. The campaign generated 0 measurable increase in sales. When I pointed this out gently at a Sunday dinner, using data from my own market analysis, my mother patted my hand. "It's about brand awareness, dear. You wouldn't understand." The financial mismanagement escalated from incompetence to outright fraud. I still had access to the company's financials, a legacy permission from my grandmother's time that they had never bothered to revoke. I was an invisible ghost in their machine. One night, unable to sleep, I logged in and started digging. What I found made my stomach clench. There was a $15,000 expense for a client relations summit in Aspen. I cross-referenced the dates. There was no summit. It was a ski trip he took with his wife, documented exhaustively on her social media. He had charged ski rentals, spa treatments, and $1,000 dinners to the company card. There was the matter of the Paycheck Protection Program loan during the pandemic. Garrett had secured a loan for $110,000, citing the need to retain his staff. The documents signed by him swore the funds would be used for payroll. 2 weeks after the money landed in the company account, he laid off 3 of our most loyal, long-term warehouse employees, men who had worked for my grandfather. A month later, he leased a brand new Cadillac Escalade as his company car for $1,200 a month. The loan money had been funneled directly into his own lifestyle. The worst for me was the intellectual property theft. 5 years prior, I had developed a comprehensive proposal for an online portal. It was an inventory management system for our commercial clients that would streamline ordering, reduce errors, and give us a massive competitive edge. I presented it to my father and Garrett. Garrett had openly mocked it. "Nobody wants to order drywall screws from a website, Nancy. This is a handshake business." Now I found a budget allocation for $50,000 to a new LLC. I looked up the company. It was registered to Garrett's brother-in-law. The project name? Marshall Innovations. He had taken my entire proposal, my research, my schematics, and was attempting to develop it under a separate company he secretly controlled, intending to sell it back to Marshall Hardware at an inflated price. He was stealing from his own family, from his own legacy. And through it all, my parents enabled him. My father, a man I once respected for his quiet integrity, had become a ghost. He saw the reports, he saw the declining profits, but he couldn't bear the thought of admitting his chosen son was a failure. His silence was permission. He would sit at the head of the table, carving the roast, his face a mask of deliberate ignorance. He let Garrett pay off over $30,000 in personal credit card debt by classifying it as a discretionary executive bonus. My father signed off on it. My mother was the active agent in this farce. She was the one who managed the family's social standing, and in her world, appearances were everything. A successful son was a reflection of her own success. She would defend his most egregious errors with a ferocity that was breathtaking. "Garrett is under so much pressure," she'd say if I even hinted at a problem. "It's not easy leading a legacy company in this modern world. You should be more supportive." Supportive. I was the only thing keeping the company afloat. While Garrett was playing CEO, I was the one working in the shadows, for free. I was the one who spent 3 weeks of late nights untangling the mess from his failed software migration, manually rebuilding the client databases so we could at least salvage some of our smaller accounts. I was the one who used my own professional contacts to renegotiate shipping contracts after Garrett insulted one of our main freight carriers over a trivial issue, saving the company from a 20% increase in logistics costs. That alone saved them over $50,000 a year. I did it quietly, without fanfare, because I still loved the company my grandparents had built. I still foolishly loved the family I thought we were. I was their unpaid consultant, their secret safety net, their invisible janitor cleaning up messes they refused to even acknowledge. And what did I get in return? Pitying looks at family gatherings, condescending advice about my career. And now this public, casual shredding of my son's worth. That brings us back to Thanksgiving. To the moment the world stopped. Garrett's words hung in the air, thick and oily. At least my kids will have connections. This public school thing, it's a little embarrassing. I looked at Leo. He was trying so hard to be brave, but I could see the glistening in his eyes. He pushed his mashed potatoes around his plate, his masterpiece of a turkey dinner now just a mess of food. He had worn his favorite button-down shirt for this dinner. He had practiced telling his uncle about the VEX robotics competition, about how his team had won the regional qualifier, and he had been dismissed. Not just dismissed, but used as a pawn in his uncle's pathetic game of status. His value, his pride, his excitement, all of it had been rendered embarrassing to score a cheap point against me. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a clean, quiet break, a tectonic shift deep beneath the surface. For years I'd been absorbing these blows myself. I had rationalized them, excused them, minimized them. He's just insecure. She's just trying to keep the family together. Let it go, for the sake of peace. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about the small boy sitting next to me, whose world had just been made a little darker by the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked around the table, at my Uncle Robert staring intently at the salt shaker, at my Aunt Carol offering a weak, tight-lipped smile, at my father, his gaze fixed firmly on the slice of turkey on his plate as if it held the secrets to the universe, and at my mother, who was already moving on, asking Garrett's wife about her upcoming charity luncheon. They were all complicit. Their silence was a verdict. Leo and I were not as important as Garrett's ego. In that moment, the years of resentment, the accumulated weight of 1,000 slights, coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. I wasn't losing a family. I was losing a burden. The proxy document from my grandmother felt like a physical weight in my mind, a tool I had been given for a purpose I finally understood. It wasn't just about protecting the business. It was about protecting my son. It was about protecting myself. That was the exact second I knew someone was going to pay, not with anger or shouting, but with something far more permanent, with consequences. I picked up my napkin and gently wiped a smudge of gravy from Leo's cheek. I leaned in and whispered, "Hey, robotics champ, how about we go home and work on the code for your robot's new grabber arm?" His eyes lit up, the hurt momentarily forgotten. "Really?" "Absolutely," I said, my voice steady and clear. I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the hardwood floor. All eyes turned to me. I smiled. A serene, calm smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was the kind of smile that should have worried them, but they were too arrogant to see it. "Thank you all for a lovely dinner," I said, my voice even. "Leo and I have to get going. We have some important work to do on a new project." My mother started to protest. "Nancy, you can't leave. We haven't even had dessert." "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it was a wall. "We're done." I took Leo's hand and we walked out, leaving the stunned silence and the smell of pumpkin pie behind us. The cut was clean. The 6 weeks between Thanksgiving and the annual shareholder meeting were a masterclass in my family's obliviousness. They acted as if nothing had happened. My mother called 3 times, each conversation circling the same drain. The first was to chastise me for my dramatic exit. The second was to ask if I was bringing my famous scalloped potatoes to the Christmas Eve dinner. The third was to complain that Garrett was so stressed and that I should be more understanding. Not once did she mention Leo. Not once did she acknowledge the cruelty of Garrett's words. Garrett himself sent me a text message 2 weeks later. It didn't contain an apology. It was a link to an article about the importance of private school alumni networks with the message, FYI for Leo's future. The audacity was breathtaking. It was like he was doubling down, trying to prove the point he had so cruelly made. I didn't reply. I simply saved a screenshot. I wasn't idle during those 6 weeks. I was preparing. I retrieved Grandma Edith's proxy document from my safe deposit box and met with a corporate lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Chen, who specialized in family business disputes. We went over the company bylaws, the shareholder agreements, and the proxy itself. It was ironclad. For the purposes of voting, I was, in effect, Grandma Edith. I was the majority. They don't know? Ms. Chen asked, her eyebrows raised. They have no idea, I confirmed. My grandmother was a very discreet woman. This will be interesting, she said with a thin smile. Next, I did my due diligence. I couldn't just remove Garrett. I had to have a superior alternative ready. I spent dozens of hours researching turnaround specialists, CEOs who had experience with mid-sized, family-run distribution companies. I found the perfect candidate, a woman named Eleanor Albright. She had a formidable reputation for respecting a company's legacy while ruthlessly modernizing its operations. She was known for her integrity and her no-nonsense approach. I reached out to her through a professional network, and we had a confidential conversation. I laid out the situation, the declining profits, the mismanagement, the untapped potential. I didn't mention the family drama. I kept it strictly business. She was intrigued. The day of the shareholder meeting was cold and gray, the sky the color of slate. I dropped Leo off at school, and he gave me a hug. "Good luck at your boring meeting, Mom," he said. I smiled. "Thanks, sweetie. I think today's might be a little less boring than usual." I walked into the conference room at Marshall Hardware's headquarters. The air was stale with the scent of old coffee. My father was there, along with Garrett and 2 minor shareholders, distant cousins who always voted with my father. Garrett was in his element, pacing at the front of the room in an expensive suit, gesturing at a PowerPoint presentation filled with meaningless corporate jargon. "Leveraging synergistic assets," he was saying, "to optimize our brand footprint going forward." It was a word salad designed to mask the abysmal quarterly numbers. I took my seat quietly. My father gave me a brief, anxious nod. Garrett smirked at me, the same condescending smirk from Thanksgiving. He saw me as a nuisance, a box to be checked on the attendance list. He had no idea he was looking at his executioner. He finished his presentation and my father cleared his throat. "Well, thank you, Garrett. Now the first item on the agenda is the vote to reaffirm our current CEO and board leadership." He looked around the table. "All in favor?" My father raised his hand. The 2 cousins, as expected, raised theirs. It all came down to the 51% block of shares held in my grandmother's trust. Garrett looked at me, his smile widening. "Well, Nancy, I think we can mark Grandma's vote as a yay for family continuity, right? Let's just formalize it and move on." This was the moment. The air crackled with anticipation, though only I knew why. I took a slow breath, letting the silence hang for a beat longer. Then I looked directly into my brother's eyes. "No," I said. The room went dead silent. Garrett's smirk faltered. "What? What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated, my voice calm and even. I reached into my leather portfolio and slid a document across the polished table. It was the notarized proxy agreement. Per the final directive of Edith Marshall, executed on August 14th, I hold the sole and exclusive voting rights for her 51% share in this company. The color drained from Garrett's face. He looked as if I had just slapped him. My father snatched the paper, his hands trembling as he read it. He looked from the document to me, his expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. Nancy, what is this? It's exactly what it looks like, Dad, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I felt nothing. Not anger. Not pity. Nothing. Grandma trusted me to protect her legacy. Garrett finally found his voice. It was a strangled, furious whisper. You can't do this. Oh, I can, I said. I then addressed the room formally. I vote no on the reaffirmation of Garrett Marshall as CEO. Furthermore, I would like to make a new motion. I slid a second folder onto the table. I nominate Ms. Eleanor Albright for the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Her resume is attached. She has accepted the position, contingent on this board's approval. Chaos erupted. Garrett shot to his feet, his chair screeching backward. You traitor! You snake! After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done to me, I thought. My father was sputtering, speechless. Nancy, this is your brother. This is family. This is a business, I countered, my voice like ice. And it is failing. I have one more motion. I paused, letting them absorb the shock. I propose the creation of a new role. Head of Warehouse Inventory Management. It will involve a hands-on approach to logistics, reporting directly to the new Chief Operating Officer. I nominate Garrett Marshall for this position. It will give him a valuable opportunity to learn the business from the ground up. The demotion was the final devastating blow. It wasn't just about removing him from power. It was about imposing a consequence that fit the crime. He had played king for years. Now he could learn what it meant to actually work. I cast 51% of the vote yay for both motions, I concluded. The motions pass. The meeting is adjourned. I stood up, gathered my things, and walked toward the door. Garrett was screaming now, a torrent of insults and threats. My father was pleading. Nancy, don't do this. Think about how this looks. Think about your mother. I paused at the door and looked back at them, at the wreckage of their privilege. I am thinking about my mother, I said quietly, and my father, and my brother. But for the first time, I'm thinking about my son more. I walked out and didn't look back. The immediate aftermath was a firestorm. My phone began to explode with calls and texts before I even reached my car. My mother's name flashed on the screen, followed by Garrett's, then my father's. I let them all go to voicemail. I knew what they would be. Arias of rage, guilt, and manipulation. I drove to Leo's school, parked, and just sat there for a few minutes, breathing. The heavy weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for decades felt lighter. I wasn't losing a family, I was losing a burden. The barrage continued for days. When I wouldn't answer their calls, they deployed the flying monkeys. My Aunt Carol called, her voice dripping with false concern. Nancy, dear, I know you and Garrett have had your differences, but you're tearing the family apart. This is so public. Can't you just let it go? For family? The time for letting things go is over, Aunt Carol, I replied calmly and hung up. I received texts from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, telling me I was selfish and cruel. Family backs family, always has, one message read. I sent a single templated response to each of them. Garrett's professional conduct led to this outcome. This is a business matter. My son is my only family matter. Then I blocked their numbers, one by one. It was a methodical cleansing process. The climax of their desperation came a week later. My parents appeared on my doorstep unannounced. They looked haggard. My father, for once, was the one to speak, his voice strained. Nancy, you have to undo this. Your brother is a wreck. Your mother hasn't slept. You've made your point. Now fix it. There is nothing to fix, I said, standing in the doorway, not inviting them in. My mother pushed past him, her face a mask of fury. How dare you? After all we have given you. We did what we had to for our children. You did what you had to for one of your children, I corrected her. You only have one. The Freudian slip hung in the air, but she didn't even notice. This is about your pride, she hissed. Garrett made one little joke, and you've decided to ruin his life over it. This was it. The apology test. I had decided on this in the cold, quiet hours after the meeting. It would be my final gauge of their capacity for change. It wasn't a joke, Mom. It was a calculated insult aimed at a 10-year-old boy. But you're right. I'm willing to discuss a path forward. Hope flickered in their eyes. I will call Ms. Albright and discuss a transition plan. I will even consider apologizing to Garrett for the public nature of this change on one condition. Anything, my father said, grasping at the straw I'd offered. Garrett has to come here, to this house, look my son in the eye, and give him a sincere, heartfelt apology for belittling him and his passions in front of 20 people. He needs to tell Leo that his school is not embarrassing and that his achievements on the robotics team are something to be proud of. They stared at me as if I had just started speaking in tongues. My mother's face contorted in disbelief. "You're being dramatic," she scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. He's not going to do that. It was a joke. Leo is a child. He bounces back. He's probably already forgotten about it." And there it was, the final, irrefutable proof. My son's pain was an inconvenience to them. His feelings were irrelevant. The protection of Garrett's ego was the only thing that mattered. I felt a profound, final calm settle over me. It's easier when people show you exactly who they are. "Then there's nothing more to discuss," I said, my voice soft but utterly final. I slowly and deliberately closed the door in their shocked faces. I leaned against it, listening to their indignant muttering fade as they walked away. I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace. The severance was complete. The months that followed were a study in contrasts. My life became quiet. The constant hum of family-induced anxiety that had been my lifelong companion simply stopped. The locks on my doors were changed, metaphorically and literally. Leo and I settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. We spent our weekends at the Science Museum, building elaborate Lego creations and working on his robot. He was happy. He was thriving in his embarrassing public school, surrounded by friends who shared his interests and teachers who encouraged his curiosity. His robotics team went to the state championships. Seeing the pride on his face as he held up their second-place trophy was worth more than any family fortune. Meanwhile, the slow rot began to set in on the other side of the wall I had built. Ms. Albright, true to her reputation, was a force of nature. She cleaned house. She audited the books and uncovered the full extent of Garrett's fraud, the Aspen trip, the misuse of the PPP loan, the shell company for my stolen idea. The board, under my 51% directive, chose not to press criminal charges, but demanded he sign a repayment agreement, his future wages to be garnished for the next decade. The regret was heavier than any debt. Garrett had to actually do the job he'd been given. He had to show up at the warehouse at 7 a.m. and learn how to use a forklift and a barcode scanner. I heard through a former employee that he was sullen, incompetent, and universally disliked. He, who had bragged about connections, now had to take orders from the warehouse manager he had once threatened to fire. The financial consequences were swift. Without his inflated CEO salary and his fraudulent expense account, his lavish lifestyle crumbled. The Escalade was repossessed. He and his wife had to sell their sprawling McMansion in the gated community and move into a much smaller rental. Their children, the ones with the guaranteed connections, remained at their elite private school, but on a drastically reduced scholarship that became a source of constant, whispered humiliation. My sister-in-law, who had once smirked at me from across the Thanksgiving table, was now working retail to make ends meet. My parents were adrift. Their social standing, so tied to their son's perceived success, had taken a massive hit. They tried to spin the story, telling friends that Garrett had stepped back to learn the operational side of the business, but no one believed it. They became isolated, the architects of their own lonely kingdom. About a year after the meeting, Marshall Hardware, under Ms. Albright's leadership, posted its first profitable quarter in 3 years. Profits were up 30%. She had implemented a version of my online portal, giving me full credit in the annual report, and it had been a resounding success. As a shareholder, I received my first substantial dividend check. I used the money to book a trip for Leo and me to go to the Kennedy Space Center. As we stood there, watching a launch, Leo's face upturned in pure awe, I felt a sense of rightness that was bone deep. I had made the right choice. My loyalty was not owed to people who saw me as a utility, and my son as collateral damage. My loyalty was to him. If you've ever had to build a boundary, you know it's not a wall to keep others out. It's a foundation to build a better life on. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, respect does, love does. Loyalty earns its place at your table. My old family demanded a seat they had never earned. My new family, the small happy one, standing right next to me, had built the table themselves. Protecting your child matters more than tradition. Protecting your peace matters more than keeping a toxic peace for others. Some doors have to close, not because of pride or anger, but so that better, brighter ones can finally open. I never regretted a single second.